will. So we're looking at the archaeology comparison, and it's gone really well. And we've been to different areas. We did the medieval period last week, interestingly enough. And now, today, we're going to be looking into the Iron Age period and a little bit about the Romans as well. So what I aim to do today is to compare 3 of the 4 areas of the regions of Britain that we look at. So I've got 2 sites from Cymru, I got 2 sites from Orkney, and I've got 2 sites from Cornwall. I really struggled with Cumbria, and I thought it's not going to work. So that we'll just do, we do have the comparison across Britain anyway. Now, this site, we start off with Anglesey, and in fact, we go back to Anglesey for the other site as well. This is a site known as Dinligi, and it's a site that I've not actually been to, and it sort of fits in with a little bit of the excitement that I have inside me. And the little bit of the excitement I have inside me, I love Iron Age sites that have a bit of Roman chucked in as well. I love it because naturally the Roman period is a period that I do really get interested in and get passionate about. I get passionate about the Iron Age period as well, particularly structural stone walls involving the Iron Age period. I went to the Clean Peninsula with my beautiful daughter Bethan and my beautiful partner Michelle, and we visited a site on the Clean Peninsula, Trier Kerry, and it's an Iron Age site. I've done a little video of it. Roundhouses there as well. Very difficult to get to. And then in the notes it says that this site continued from the Iron Age into the Roman period with very little change, except for those linear buildings that you see in front of you, those rectangular buildings, and you see the circular buildings. Now, the lecture that I'm doing tomorrow, that some of you haven't had yet, I know Peter has. One of the things I've been putting across is the sense of continuity. Just because you've got the Roman period into 50 odd years AD in North Wales, and then you go into 100 years AD in North Wales, it's not the abandonment of the roundhouse completely. The roundhouse continues in use as a style. And when you look at the likes of Orkney at this same time, into the period years after the birth of Christ, Iron Age / Roman period, you know, the linear line comes into this, you know, the what you're seeing, but it's a bit of a cosmopolitan site, this one. So Dinlligoi is a later prehistoric Iron Age walled settlement set on the summit of a limestone plateau close to its very dangerous edge. Now, this site, lots of the, one thing I've done tonight is I've looked at examples of sites that have been methodically archaeologically excavated. So the 2 sites in Cornwall excavated, the 2 sites in Orkney excavated, and the 2 sites in Anglesey have been excavated. And some names in Cornwall will ring a bell. So this site itself, they used the word cleared. This site was cleared in 1905. And when they cleared this site, what they came across, beautiful reconstruction, actually, we've got some nice reconstructions. What they came across was lots of Roman material, and then Iron Age material, and then buildings that were just Roman, which is not really what we're meant to be doing today, and buildings that are just Iron Age with the material that's there. So those circular buildings probably belong to I don't know, the birth of Christ, and the rectangular buildings sort of come into 100 years after Christ, when you've got that influence of Roman civilization on a large tract of our landscape. I know I was criticized a couple of months ago by saying, you know, the Romans introduced the straight line. Well, to be honest with you, in the archaeology, that's what it sort of tells us. So the remains, all these remains that we're looking at have been consolidated. They've been offered for display to the public. And that's why I didn't do the Cumbria sites, because there was nothing like that in Cumbria. There are Iron Age villages, stone roundhouses in Cumbria, but not on display like this, like the ones we're looking at. So the dry stone walls today, and again, like all these sites we're looking at, lots of the dry stone walls, the Iron Age walls, in all the cases that we're looking at least in some cases about 1 meter above ground level, not foundation walls, but above ground level. And also we've got some walls up to 2 meters high surviving, and they've been inundated with sand and mud and all sorts of stuff. One site that I really wanted to, that I really could have done today, and it's just occurred to me actually. I'd be lying if I said that's one thing I was going to do today, but I've just remembered. Near me in the Rhondda Valley, there's a site which is a bit similar to this really. And you've got these stone walls, like freestanding stone walls that you can visit, a place known as Blaen Rhondda. And it's Iron Age, and you go amongst these circular rooms and walls and stuff, and you just, hairs go up on the back of your neck. It's like, you know, you're going around these remains. It's great. So so these roundhouses, if we go to my little notes, we're primarily interested in these roundhouses. They're built in a number of different ways, and one of the traditions of building in North Wales, even today, is actually having flat slabs going vertical to create boundaries and so on, which might not sound unusual, but we're used to building in horizontal planes down here, lids that lay flat rather than upright. And this is what we're seeing with this example. So these sort of freestanding buildings, the roundhouses themselves, interesting diameters. They're not massively, they're not huge in area, but the largest one is just under 7.5 meters internal diameter, which I'm sure that's going to be big enough for a small family. And obviously, if you compare this with the rectangular buildings, you know, these are quite smaller in area. Circular buildings are usually smaller in area than rectangular buildings. It's the way it is. But we have seen lots of reconstructions of roundhouses. The one or two that the ones at St. Fagans are quite big actually, but the stone ones are usually quite small. So when you're looking at Watland daub structures, timber from in the Iron Age, looking at reconstructions, you can do a lot more with wood than you can do with stone in some effects. I don't think that's entirely fair. But I think it's I think the feeling with this type of site is that there's that sense of continuity. You've got these really nice, these two really interesting roundhouses, and nearby there's evidence of other roundhouses, these stone roundhouses as well. One of the things that we think of when we look at roundhouses in regards to reconstructions is that when we go to somewhere like St. Fagans, usually if you get, this is not really the rule, but usually the reconstructed examples at St. Fagans that are made with a stone base are representative of Iron Age structures in the north of Cymru, and usually the ones made of wattle and daub and primarily timber are from the south. That's not always the rule, but it's a good leveler to go by. So nice site, Din Lligoi. And we went to Anglesey, and our Anglesey trip was very strange. We didn't have a big gang with us. Bill wasn't on that one. I think Pat may have been there, but I know Pete was. We didn't visit this site, and it's really nice the way these buildings are constructed. Obviously, we're not far off the original levels in some ways, because then the roof would have sat, as we've seen with the reconstruction. So if we go back to the reconstruction just briefly, we can see that the roof takes up a great deal of space, a really nice conical beehive space. And when the whole thing with these types of Iron Age buildings is twofold, three actually. The smaller the area, the more insulated you're going to be. The lower the threshold going into the building, you're going to be able to keep more heat in there. And obviously, you don't have any windows. You just have one entranceway, usually. You don't have any windows, and any smoke exits through the roof. Very different from, if you look at that sort of Romanized type building at the back there, where there's an escape in the roof, rather than the whole point with these buildings is that they need to contain heat, and you've got a smoke layer hovering in that space where the roof is again. So we've moved on from Din Lligoi, and the next site that we are going to visit now is taking us to somewhere which would be very familiar to, I think, Peter. And there is Chowcaster. Now we've now moved to Cornwall, actually. And did I not show you a map of where that site was earlier on? Wasn't there a map of showing you where it was? Anyway, this is there was supposed to be a map with this Din Lligoi, and if anyone's interested, it's on Anglesey. It's on the northeastern side of Anglesey, if anyone's interested in finding that site. So if we go back to the images again, just to sort of make sure that Goff hasn't fallen asleep with the tones of my voice. What are we looking at now, Rosamond?
There's more ruins.
Oh, for God's sake.
Definitely two separate.
Yeah, that'll do. That'll do. You've made your point.
Okay. Did you say this was called Chowcaster?
Yeah, but it's spelled a very. There's different ways of pronouncing it. It's Chowcaster. Basically Chysauster, Chowcaster or Chowcaster, and people call it something else.
This is Cornish, is it?
Yeah, this is Cornish. Yes, you got that bit right.
Well, perhaps Pete will be able to tell us how to pronounce it.
Yes, he will. Because, and also, for whatever reason, all my little maps are gone. Which is a bit of a shame, really. This site is on the Cornish Peninsula. There are maps, and when we look at the Cornish Peninsula again, I'll show you another map. So this is on the Cornish Peninsula, and this is a typical Iron Age settlement. And this site itself, lots of these sites that we're looking at, all seem to be around the same period, around 2,000 years ago or thereabout, and then they're sort of pipping into the Roman period, and they sort of continue onwards. So this Iron Age settlement in Cornwall is one of the finest examples of an Iron Age settlement anywhere in the country. It's certainly the finest in Cornwall. The Chowcaster Ancient Village is one of a small number of English heritage sites that that wasn't open this year. We were gonna visit this site, but they were undertaking some restoration work, and it's going to be hopefully reopened in 2021. Now, these are described. Now, the word is they're described as courtyard houses. You can imagine that what you've got these buildings. So if you get a bit closer in, you get these arrangements of buildings around a courtyard. Again, a courtyard, buildings around a courtyard, buildings around a courtyard. Again, more buildings around a courtyard. So this is what they're referred to as courtyard houses. And they're found, this type of style is found particularly within that Cornish peninsula, Penzance Peninsula, as it should be referred to as. And there are examples of these sites on the Isles of Scilly, another place that I never go to. You know, the lecture topic that we're doing this week is about Japan. Well, I've never done Japan before, and I've been lecturing for decades, right? I've never done the Isles of Scilly either, so maybe they need a little bit in there. But it's also, there's different ways of describing this village. It's almost as if in this description in front of me, they line up as if they're a village street. You know, they got ample space. So, you know, it's almost as if you could go follow the cursor, go down here, and you've got all these courtyard houses around, and you go down here and you wander around. It's got that sort of medieval village type thing to it, but this is 1,200 years before that type of medieval village. And basically what would have happened, there would have been these stone buildings, and you'd have had a usual conical roof, and it would have been, these would have been thatched rooms, simply thatched rooms. So the people of Chowcaster, like all these other villages, like all these other people, they were farmers. And again, this site's been archaeologically excavated, so we've got all those similarities, and it's revealed some really nice evidence that they're very much into their cereal crops, and these were grown from the other evidence that we get from aerial photography and other working out the landscape and bits of Iron Age pottery on the field and so on. We can work out that they're farming extensively. So it's a village within a farming landscape. So they're not sort of hunter-gatherer people or anything like that. And also we've got evidence that they would have kept pigs and goats. And in the other thing as well is, it says specifically, the site is believed to have been occupied for around 100 years, 200 years. So it's not occupied for a massive length of time like some of the other sites. The reason why people left this village could be to do with anything. The one thing about Cornwall, it's quite mysterious. You can love Cornwall, but you've got the mystery. There's always these questions of why you've got all these deserted villages. You go into Devon then, and you've got Bodmin, and you've got the Bodmin Moor, and you look at these landscapes that are quite bereft of settlements and so on, and you look at the same with Dartmoor as well. It's complete desolate, but there were villages there at one time, and you start to think, what has happened? What has changed? This is what's happening with this village. Could people have abandoned this village, unlike the other villages that we're looking at were used for a long period of time? There's lots of reasons why these villages and landscapes in Cornwall abandoned, but that's another question altogether. So it'd be nice to look at a couple more images of this site, and what they've got, which is something new to some of you, is the word foggy holes, or fogus. Now, fogus, there's quite a number of fogus across Cornwall. There's not hundreds, but there's probably about 50 foggy holes, F-O-G-G-Y and F-O-G-O-U, fogus. There's about 50 of these fogus across Cornwall, and they're just for Cornwall. You only see these foggy holes in Cornwall, and they're quite mysterious. And me and Bill have been down one of these foggy holes at another site that we will look at very shortly. And there's another site, another English heritage site called the Haligi that is known for bats living in these fogus because they're nice and subterranean areas. And some believe that they were for refuges, keeping animals. They may have been there for keeping, for example, in one of them they actually found the remains of eggs. We don't really know what they're being used for, but they're particularly with Cornwall, and lots of these Iron Age sites as well. The foggy holes are particularly to do with the Iron Age. And again, looking at the remains at remember, these are Iron Age remains, and let's have a little bit of a slurp. These are Iron Age remains, and some of these Iron Age remains in places are up to a meter and a half in height, and they're very, very well made, and they're probably they probably really remain in a really, really, really good state, because the village at some state was abandoned and nobody ever went back there, foggy hole and all. It was just left. Look at the state. It's really, really well preserved. And I got to be honest with you, if you compare this type of site with some of the wonderfully well presented sites in Orkney, it makes you look at this and thinking it's a bit of a shame that it's not really looked after as well as lots of the Scottish sites. Now, this is what we're talking about in regards to a courtyard house, because you've got a nice little gateway, you've got an open area, and you've got all these conical shaped buildings. And it's like you could think of it as a villa of the Iron Age. And it's really interesting reconstruction here. And to be honest with you, the reconstructions can't be too far wrong, because the relative height of these buildings is more or less the same height that they would have been when they were deserted. So, you know, what you're seeing is you just put a little bit of a thatched roof on it, and you're more or less looking back at the Iron Age nearly 2,000 years ago. So what we're going to do now, we're going to move on to another site, and I do believe I can show you exactly where this is. Now, you've been here, haven't you, Bill, the Broch of Gurness?
Yes, we've been there, Carl, yes.
The Broch of Gurness. Now, we're going to look at two Broch sites, but this is typically the Broch of Gurness. And yes, it was a very strange trip that we actually had to Orkney that year that we actually saw this site. So Broch of Gurness, I'm not really going to talk about these Broch buildings in the middle, but the Broch of Gurness is what a Broch is. It's a long, slender, conical shaped tower, a really long, slender, conical shaped tower. That, in regards to the Broch of Mouser, on the island of Mouser, which is off the Shetland coast, that was initially up to about 15 meters in height, and it still stands in excess of 12 meters in height today. So these were long, sort of tapering silos, you know, and they had hollow walls and different ways of interpreting what a Broch is, which I don't want to do today. But in regards to the Iron Age in Orkney, what you do find is these wonderful arrangements of buildings associated with these Brochs. Just quickly again, some people believe that these Brochs were either owned by the lord of the manor, or some people believe that they were sort of community centres, or and lots of other things. And one thing that springs to mind with lots of these stone-built sites, Din Ligoy on Anglesey, not so much Chowcaster, but this site, there's a little bit of a defensive nature about it. They've got walls around these sites, and there's ditches around them, and there's banks, but they're built in varying different landscapes and terrains. So Chowcaster is sort of in the middle of nowhere at this minute, but it's not really, it doesn't command the landscape. It's not on the top of a hugely impressive hill or anything. So that's different. Chowcaster is different from this site because this is near the sea. And Din Llygoy on Anglesey isn't near the sea, but it's up fairly high. So there's no, if you're comparing these sites, there's different ways of comparing what you're seeing, and there's lots of differences. But then again, that's people. That's what the Iron Age was about. The Iron Age, like lots of periods in British history, were periods of great change. And again, living here is quite difficult to imagine. And one other thing that springs to mind when you think of these sites is they're not isolated either, because this site looks over to another broch and another Iron Age village called Midhow. Well, actually, we're going to be visiting there as well, just briefly. So these sites are not isolated. So in other words, you've got medieval villages over there, medieval villages over here, you've got medieval villages here, and you've got that sort of communication with the landscape. They're not isolated. They're, when we looked, for example, last week, we looked at the tower houses last week. You could think of those tower houses being in isolation, and lots of them were. But these types of settlements are not in isolation. They've got a sense of communication about them. And look at that spectacular image. You're looking down into this this village, this broch, this village at Gurnus, and those ditches are really impressive. They did the sort of defense thing really well. And remember, this is the Iron Age, and you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, it's all the way it's all the way in Scotland, far away from the sort of all those Iron Age hill forts of the south, and it's sort of far away from those damnable Romans, and and you're thinking, well, why do they need these banks and ditches around this sort of settlement? And again, we don't really know why. We could think that they're for defense, but there could be other reasons as well. And actually, it could be one thing, madly thinking, that if you've got a palisade across this bank, it sort of adds some shelter from the winds, because this was a very windy landscape then, and it's a very windy landscape today. So you don't need a roof blown away after all.
You certainly don't.
You certainly don't. You certainly don't. Yeah. And one thing about all these sites, and I'm bringing my master's degree into this. You've got a sense of procession, right? So you've got a straight line into the front door of the broch. You've got the medieval. Start again. You've got the Iron Age village on the left. You've got the Iron Age village on the right, and it leads directly, sort of direct access. I think that's rather interesting. And when we looked at Chowcaster, there was that sort of thing about the street, and there was the thing about the sort of interaction in and around the buildings at Chowcaster. And you've got to think about all this sort of interconnection when you look at a site like this. Rather impressive. And obviously these And one thing I pointed out earlier on, if you note, look at that. With this site, they build, they make the best use of the stone, actually. So some of the stones are actually vertical, and some of the stones around there are actually placed on the horizontal. And this was another thing that we saw on Orkney. It was very similar to what I've described with Dyn Ligoy on Anglesey, and particularly with North Wales, when I'm talking about making the best use of your stone. And if you need a little sort of little boundary, or you need to use the stone itself around a hearth or something, you can put it on the vertical, and you don't need as many stones as if you put them on the flat, you know. So different ways of sort of interpreting sites like these. So again, you're going into the broch, and when the one thing that I haven't mentioned at all in this lecture is the hearth. Really, I've mentioned about smoke exiting in the roof, but one of the things that you will see with all Iron Age buildings is that the hearth is in the middle, relatively in the middle of these buildings. You almost come in through the doorway, and there is the hearth on either side. And there's a lot to say with the interaction of these hearths, but naturally you're going to need a hearth. You're going to need to keep these buildings warm, and with all these examples of Iron Age buildings, the hearth is smack bang in the middle. Why aren't they up against the wall? Because, you know, if they're up against the wall, you need a chimney. But if they're up against the wall and you've got some timber work above that, then the timber work's going to set a light, you know. So it's always useful to have the central hearth in the middle of the building. And that sort of, that aids interpretation and air circulation and so on. Where are we there? Good. Go for it. Now, Bill, you have been to this next house, right? What I'm going to do, if you can give me a second, guys, right? I want those to remember where this next site is without looking at the top of the screen. So bear with me a sec. All right, leave that little bit right there, okay? Why? Because I want to see if I can find a way of getting them. Just do everything. So, Bill, oh God, I just remembered, Bill, you didn't come on our trip to Holyhead, did you? Peter, can you remember this one? These are the hut circles at Holyhead Mountain. Remember these, Pete? Oh, Pete's not got his mic on. So this is where we're going to go to, Holyhead Mountain hut circles next. Now, this is basically, you've got Anglesey and you've got Holyhead, that sort of thing that sticks out into the sea. And Holyhead's a really interesting landscape because on the one hand, over in Holyhead itself, you've got KARL-JAMES, which you've got a Roman fort there, a Roman fortlet, and then you've got a weird sort of vastly barren landscape, and then you look at these Holyhead mountain hut circles, and are really, really interesting, and they're just in the middle of nowhere. You just jump out the car and they're on the side of the road, and I just felt a need to do these Iron Age buildings. So these hut circles themselves, if we they are multiple shapes and sizes, and they're clussed as, if you're looking these up, look under Holyhead Mountain hut circles. The hut group is located on a level terrace just below Holyhead Mountain, and there's a number of them. There are quite a number of them. And it's not clear. We know that they were used in the Iron Age, but it's very likely that people may have been living in here far greater into the Bronze Age, and may have actually been living here way after the Iron Age, into the Roman period, into the period just before 1,000 years ago. So people are living here for a very, very long period of time. And there's some large buildings, there's the small buildings, the larger buildings interpreted as family buildings, the smaller buildings interpreted for animals, and then you've got little square, strange little structures as well. So that's a nice little bit of reconstruction. And one thing that is very clear is that there are dozens and dozens of excavated buildings here, dozens and dozens of them. And it's unlikely that they were used all at the same time, because what you can actually see in the reconstruction here, you can actually see that you've got ruins of roundhouses in amongst these habitable reconstructed buildings. This site itself, excavated at this site so far, 50 buildings have been excavated here. So used over a long period of time in the past, in the 1860s. And the site was examined again, more excavations in the 1970s, 1978, 1982. And what they've done, they with the excavations, they allow you to see the buildings. And they've consolidated about 20 of these buildings. So you can actually go and have a look around them. So let's look a little bit further. Some are like this. The walls only half a meter above ground level. But then again, they may not have been much bigger than, the walls may not have been much higher than this. As you can see, with these big conical roofs, these really impressive conical roofs on the reconstruction, you can see that most of the space is actually taken up by the space of the roof rather than the space of the side of the walls. And again, they enter in, there's sort of weird arrangements of streets as well. And some of the buildings around, some of them are oval shapes, some have these dividing walls, some have long passages leading into them. And you can sort of understand that there's a street pattern to some of them as well. Lots of evidence all the way. We've got evidence from the Bronze Age, Neolithic period, the Roman period at the site. Really nice excavated evidence. And some of them are really, really deep hollows in the ground with sort of ways leading into them, if you follow the cursor. Some of these walls are about 1 meter in height. And again, some have been really nicely reconstructed, as you can see. And you get these weird little structures. So if we go back to the plan again, you've got these sort of square, sort of rounded shaped cornered buildings, like this one, and they're like semi-subterranean. That's quite strange. And others have been excavated and allowed to sort of grow over with ones in the background. So, you know, there have been 50 excavated, but there might be 100 odd more used for a very long period of time. And again, this is in an unusual area. It's not on the top of a mountain. It's below a mountain, so it's a different than the other 3 sites that we've looked at. But it's in a very isolated part of the world. You know, you only go to Holyhead today if you want to go to Holyhead. It's not exactly on the way anywhere. So it's quite an isolated landscape. And you get all these little figurative sort of little walls that are sort of overgrown. And again, these strange little pits in the ground. You can see the landscape today. It's a landscape that has been very much, very, very much bereft of any trees for a very, very long time. and excavated in the 1860s. They're really starting to get overgrown now. But there is one thing that they're not being overgrown with trees, and they're not being overgrown with brambles and all the rest of it. So one thing I'd like to do, a little bit of a distraction. One thing I'd like to do is we've seen, this is like an open site, right? This is an open site. And I'd just like to quickly go back to our site in Orkney again. And I'd just like to mention, something here, that this site itself flows from around 200 years BC, and then flows all the way to about the birth of Christ, into the period that we're actually talking about. And again, I just wanted to look back at my notes, and it's sort of saying that the broch was abandoned and the ditches filled in, and then the whole site was almost left to its devices, and then one family lived here. So sometimes people went back to these sites, like this one at Holyhead, and they went back and lived in the remains, you know, that type of thing. So the next site I want to go to now is a site that I've actually been to with, I think, Bill and Peter. This next site is known as Carn-Yenny. There's where Carn-Yenny is. And Chowcaster is a little bit further on over. That's the site that we previously looked at. So we look at another site known as Carn-Yenny. It's Carneuny. And this is, again, like that site at Dyn Ligoy in North Wales. The reason why it's similar is because you've got an Iron Age site, and then you've got this little weird structure over here, which is very different from the other buildings. So, like all the sites that we've seen, is a very impressive, very enigmatic Iron Age site, and the excavations at this site tell us that this is a site which is very different from Chowcaster. This is a site that people have lived at for thousands and thousands of years. Excavations on this site have shown that people have been living here about 2,000 or 3,000 years before these Iron Age buildings were constructed. And there's evidence to say that the present buildings that you actually see on your screen now date back to around 200 years BC. They go all the way to the period of the birth of Christ. And they're still visible today, and it's an open access site. I think this is sort of looked after by English Heritage, but you are able to go here. It's at the end of a footpath. So Carn-Yenny is best known not only for the state of the walls, which you can see in front of you. Some of these walls are a meter and a half high. It's also known for its fogu. It's got a site with a nice little fogu in it. So, and that's where it is. So basically, subterranean. You go in here, or you go in here, or you go in here, or you go in here, and it leads into a little subterranean sort of roundhouse type structure, which I do believe I got an image of. And so Carn-Yenny is not only famous for the wonderful walls here, is best known for the well-preserved state of the large fogu, an underground passage, and it's quite an interesting network. And when it's wet, you can't get into this subterranean passage because it's completely flooded. And you can see these slabs there that create the roof for it. So if we sort of move on to some of the other images. Into the dark we go. I'm just going to bring some more of my notes up here. So into the dark we go. It's roofed with massive stone slabs. Although the exact purpose of this fogu and most foggy holes, as we mentioned, we don't really know what these things were used for. And the site was abandoned not when the Romans came into Cornwall, but actually quite late. It continued to be used, and it's likely that the evidence of some of those walls that I showed you earlier on, these walls over on the left hand corner there, even though the upstanding remains are not particularly of the Roman period, this is probably where there may have actually been a square linear building associated with the Iron Age, as this landscape of Cornwall starts to be influenced by the Romans. Excavations. The site was discovered in the 1800s, and it was particularly impressive enough because when it was discovered, they were looking for tin deposits. And people were so taken aback by this subterranean building, they were taken aback by the walls, that they just basically said, no, we're not going to destroy this site. And then there was this guy whose name cropped up all the time when we were in Cornwall, a guy by the name of William Copeland Borlass. And William Copeland Borlass, wherever we went in Cornwall, his name, he had excavated everywhere. So he was excavated at this site in 1863 to 1868. And he examined this site and he excavated it. He did some nice little sketches of it. And he examined and he exposed the foggy hole as well. And it was again excavated in the 1920s. And basically the buildings, it was decided that these are courtyard house buildings like Chowcaster. So basically you've got these buildings around a courtyard, as you can clearly see from the aerial photograph, and these large buildings. So basically this is the courtyard. You've got these little compartments, which are the houses, very similar to Chowcaster. They got their foggy hole there. And more work was actually undertaken here in the 1960s and 1970s, and a total of nine of these sort of courtyard houses were actually excavated. And it's said that this site was being used for an incredible period of from about 400 years BC to about 300 years AD. So this site is being used for between 700 and 800 years. But again, it's definitely a really nice Iron Age village. And you can see this sort of building wall here that is what we do believe is that there may have been a Roman building where this window is. And then later on, probably in about the 1700s, a little farmhouse was actually established here. This is what that's saying. And again, looking down on this really nice network of courtyarded buildings and round houses, and the wall around it is a modern boundary wall, and it could possibly be said that it's unlikely that this had a boundary wall around it initially. But obviously the boundary wall has been added around it to sort of protect this land, this wonderful archaeological resource. It's quite a beautiful site. And this is that chambered foggy, this chambered central structure inside this foggy hole network that we've described. And in here, interesting enough, there's like a green algae that when you shone your torch on it and you take your torch off it, the algae actually illuminates. It's quite a very strange algae, and this building is actually known for that very strange rare algae that can actually be found within this structure. It's unlikely this was corbelled. It's likely that this would have had a timber roof on it, a platform type roof, and then there was a building on top of this, and that may have been access in the foggy hole and lots of different things, but that's another lecture. Again, access into that subterranean building that we just mentioned. Again, into the dark we go. So the last building we're going to look at, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of a slurp. And this is the last building we can actually look at in connection with these Iron Age structures. So me and Bill were here, and we had Kathy with us, Pat was with us, and there was David and Clive and his son, and it was me, and with the wonderful archaeologist Julie Gibson. And we were invited back to her house at the end, and we all had a drink of whiskey, didn't we, Bill?
We did.
But you didn't have your whiskey until very much at the end, because you went off gallivanting with me.
I did.
You admit all these things, and it's amazing that we actually done them. That's the thing. So this itself is another site that we've got one of those brocks. We've got an Iron Age village around it as well. So this well-preserved Iron Age brock was built on a promontory, the island of Rousey. So it's just within the Orkney archipelago of islands. With its landward side massively defended by walls and ditches along the two natural inlets cutting into the rocky shore on its flanks. And we'll show you a bit of that as well. Again, this is like all these sites that we've been looking at. Yeah, they're in different positions, but this one looks out to the Broch of Gurnos on the other side on mainland Orkney. So this is where the island of Rousey is. And one thing I haven't said for this whole sort of seminar, one thing I haven't mentioned at all is that the reason why you're building these roundhouses is because there's large amounts of stone around to build these roundhouses out in the first place. I can remember when we went to this site on Rousey, this promontory site on Rousey. I remember somebody asked the question, where are they getting the stone from? And I'm going like this, because we had just passed the quarry where they got the stone from. So this is a quarry. So basically what they're doing is lifting the lids of stone off and just moving them over and building a structure. That's all they're doing. So this brock, this brock itself, this site itself, the village around it, these are quite simple buildings, but within these buildings that you can see briefly around the outside, they found the likes of various artifacts like pottery, bronze, jewelry, bone and stone tools. And again, this is one of those notable sites that has been extensively excavated. And another fact that I've completely missed out altogether. The other fact that I've missed out altogether is most of these buildings are built, there's no mortar being used. There's no cement being used. All what they're doing is, if we go to a little bit of a wall, mid-Howbroch, and you can see all these little buildings. There's the broch there. Not very clear image actually, which is a bit of a shame really. But you've got the broch in the middle and all these buildings around the outside. And again, this sort of bit of an approach, you know, bit more of an approach to it. And if we sort of, oh, look at that there. It takes me back. So yeah, what you're doing with these buildings is that you're building stones on top of stone, and then basically you're rendering the outside with clay, and then you're painting over the clay. And usually what's happening is the overhang of the roof itself protects the outside of the clay on the wall, so it's baked by the sun, and that perfectly insulates the walls. And so you don't need the mortar, you don't need cement, you don't need any clay beds. Basically, these are simply built. A roof protects the wall, and that offers you great insulation properties for these wonderful structures. Hang on, if we go back.
Carl,
Yeah, go on.
with each of these places, you need to look at the geology of the area.
Yes.
This area and the other block are sedimentary rocks. They're easily split quite flat. And if you see in some of the in the other block, they have vertical slabs because of the nature of the rock is easy to split into quite big slabs. And some of those slabs they put vertically.
Yes,
and they all fit together very, very nicely.
And exactly
you don't need
the same.
Mortar.
You don't need mortar. And exactly the same can be said for the construction work at Dinllygwi, and where you've got vertical slabs as well, where you've got that. You don't need mortar at all. And the point is the other, if we want to talk structurally with these sites, this is what we're talking about structurally. You're not the brocks are a bit of an anathema. They're just like really weird, right? So if you take away the brock thing in this whole argument and you compare these buildings around the outside of the brocks with the other Iron Age village buildings that we've actually been seeing, you're only talking about 1-2 meters high in stone. And as long as you can lay the stones on top of each other, and they all interlock and they all work, and these buildings are not vast, then they're gonna be freestanding, right? And then you've got the timber structure then to actually support the roof and the thatch and all the rest of it, and everything really, really, really works well together. So this is what we're talking about. You don't need mortar for buildings that are no more than about 1 meter, 2 meters in height. But the exception to the rule is when we look at brocks, which I think that should be another lecture that we'll do in the future sometime. Very strange buildings in Britain. We'll compare ones in Cornwall, ones here, and ones in Orkney, and those in Cumbria as well. But the brocks are actually, against what I've already just said, the brocks are completely freestanding, 12, 15 meter tall structures, all made of dry stone. However, it's the way they're constructed that keeps them standing in the first place. But that's something else altogether. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to actually and again, one last thing. Actually, we've basically done an hour. One last thing with these buildings is that there are fireplaces within them. These are quite small structures around the brocks, but most of the buildings that we've seen in relation to the Iron Age have been small buildings. And this is what they've got in comparison. They're all small buildings. They're all built in relatively different areas. The other comparison, they use stone. The hearths are in the middle. They've got there's lots of timber about to build the roof structure and so on. So what we're going to do now, we're going to ask, are there any questions?
Yep.
Go for it. Let's just sort of, right, let's just go with that. Right, Goff, you start.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Are there any other examples of these sort of structures and buildings in the rest of Britain and Europe? Well,
in Europe, yes. The difference is, as I said, the answer is building material. So if you go to somewhere like Somerset, the Somerset buildings that were excavated at the turn of the 1900s are all made of timber. There's no stone there at all. In Somerset, there are no stone at all. If you want to compare structures in sort of Gloucester, you're going to come across the same type of thing. Lots of timber being used. Wiltshire's the same. It's just timber. There's very little stone in timber. And in somewhere like Wiltshire, you've actually got cob walls. So you've got walls made of earth and clay and straw, and you've got thatch on them. So you've got walls that are made of mud in Wiltshire. So in areas where there's no stone, you're building out of mud, clay, and wood, and straw and dung. But where you've got stone, you've got the luxury of using all the materials. And where you've got, like, the shame was that I couldn't really come up with any decent examples in Cumbria. But Cumbria is a very rocky landscape. And so is the likes of Derbyshire as well. There were I could have mentioned examples in Yorkshire, Derbyshire, but when you look at, say, Lincolnshire, where you've got large flat landscapes and so on, again, they're not going to be building with the levels of stone that you see in these areas that we've been looking at tonight.
Okay, thanks.
So what about you, Pete? Yeah, thanks for that. What about you, Pete?
Well, but to me, it's all about the geology of the areas where these places were built.
Yes.
If you look at those brocks, those stones are fairly regular in shape, and laid one upon the other. You look down at Chichester, and you see the stones are all of different shapes, but interlocked together. They've been selected for their shape to be put into whatever is necessary. They're all totally irregular because it's extremely hard rock. They're all granite and basalt and things like that. But
it all works.
Each place where they carried out these buildings, where there is sufficient rock, obviously they built the walls higher and there was less timber used. Where there was less good rock, then they've used more timber.
That's exactly it. So Rosamond.
Oh, I was just wondering about sort of Viking influence. I don't know whether, you know, people coming from the north area there coming over.
But obviously that's from a completely different period in time. So we're focusing on the
whether they've been going back and forth. I don't know. That was sort of striking me. But I like the recon picture at Chichester in Cornwall, and you've really got an idea of how people lived then in the Iron Age.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah.
What about you, Ellen?
No questions, but they were lovely examples. They really, really nice roundhouses. Lovely, aren't they?
Yeah, they really, really worked. They really worked. Pat, what about you? You've been to some of these with us.
Right. No, I enjoyed it. Yes. No questions. No. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for that, Pat. And Bill?
Yes, when we went to the Broch at Gurness, it was notable that the wall was one solid wall, about 4 or 5 feet thick, and
Yeah.
it was an open space. When we went to the one at Midhow on Rossay, in fact, the wall was double skinned, like a cavity
that was
wall.
for the Broch, yeah.
For the Broch I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And you could actually walk up to what was an upper floor, maybe more than one upper floor as well.
Yes.
And also, Midhow was semi-detached. If you recall, there were thin slabs
A third
partitioned.
division inside the building, yes.
Yeah, right. And the last question, did we not discuss the possibility that after the Iron Age, these buildings might have been occupied by the Picts?
Particularly in Orkney, yes, because of the way they're building, yes.
We did sort of talk about that, didn't we?
Yes, we did, because of the way they're building, yes. That's right.
Because there's no evidence of Pictish villages anywhere. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, there's obviously Pictish villages at Burzay. Burzay, yeah. And we've got evidence of Viking buildings at Burzay as well. And we've got evidence of Pictish buildings on Shetland that I visited as well. There is Pictish stuff out there, yes.
Yeah. It was magical. It really was.
Yes, it was. Yes, we didn't have any strange stuff from David on that one either. Basically,
it was good.
Every few years we have a John or a David join us.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to say anything. Oh God, what's his name now? Stav. You don't have to say anything, but if you want to say something, put your mic on now. And Pam, do you want to say anything now? Can't hear you.
should be able to hear me now.
Go on, Pam.
Yeah.
Give it a last blast.
I will. I think I've been to the first site, Dingley.
Ah,
with
you've been there.
Bridgewater.
My God.
I think so. I am pretty sure. Went with Bridgewater Archaeological Group, and to confirm that it is that one, the house that you can see, it is a built house, actually owns the site, and we sat and ate our sandwiches in the round parts of the houses.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a lovely feeling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've never been to that.
It was really
site.
nice.
No, I've
Yeah.
not been to that one.
I'm sure it is that one.
No, that if
Definitely
once seen, never
Wales.
forgotten. Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Definitely.
thanks for all that. Thank you for that. Anything else you want to say quick? No?
One other thing, Carl, that algae that we saw in the Fogu at Carnooney, there was when I went to the Fogu at Alhigi, within there was the same type of algae, and which as you say almost glowed in the
Yes.
torchlight. And I also went to a Fogu over in Jersey, which is very, very similar to all of them.
Ah, nice. We'll have to do the Isles of Scilly one time. So do the people of the Isles of Scilly think themselves as Cornish, Bill? No.
Yeah, that'd be good. That'd be good.
Yeah, that'd be good. Right. So next week, I'm going to let you know what we're going to do next week.
My shelter, by the way, was a Celtic village.
Ah, Celtic.
Shut up.
Celtic. Oh,
Yeah, thanks for that. Next week we're gonna look at a weird topic: causewayed enclosures and sky burial sites.
Oh,
hold me back.
So that's what we're going to be doing next week: sky burials, causewayed enclosure sites. So that's what we're doing. Just like to mention, obviously, we got tomorrow, and anyone interested in Saturday Tales from the Crypt. If there's no other questions, I'm going to call that a night. So anyway, thanks for joining us. Anyone wants to chat?
thank you very much.
At the end. But anyway, thanks for that, Peter, Goff, Rosamond, Pam, Ellen, Stav, Pat, and Bill. And I will see you all tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow mainly. Anyway, take care, guys.
Bye.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Happy days.